If we had to start learning a language from the very beginning, completely from scratch, how would we go about it? We have a few ideas.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to Why Friends English. This video is going to be a little bit different because we're talking about starting over, right? Starting over a new language, and how would we go about it?
A lot of you have joined the channel over the last few months, and in case you don't know, we each have started several languages, but it's like the stereotypical thing that happens in American education. Spanish in high school because it's a requirement. We each chose an ancient language in university to study so that we could practice with translation and grammar and all kinds of stuff. So he did ancient Hebrew and I did ancient Greek. Then we moved abroad and we learned a living language by being in that country, by living and having to use that language. And that was Mandarin. But things shift when you switch countries, and COVID changed everything for us. We had to come back to the United States and try to continue learning Mandarin while living in the United States. And that definitely took a lot of change in strategy again.
Yeah. So the question is now, what would we do?
Wait. Are we talking about back when we had a lot of time? Or are we going to start over this language with like work and kids and all the things?
No. We are here now.
Okay, we're going from here now. That might change a little bit of what I do.
No, what it does make sense. It's a good question because, like, when we were in university, we had a lot of time that we could throw into learning these languages.
We didn't know that we had a lot of time.
We had two part-time jobs each, but we had more time that we could spend throwing into language. And so when we were abroad, same thing. Before a small family, we were able to leverage more of the time that we had in order to study in a different way. But now, with two kids involved, it's a different story.
It's a different story. But on the other hand, we get to practice in ways that we didn't before. Like we get to incorporate kids, which is kind of cool. And it helps a lot with actually a lot of the basic stuff. Like it keeps your beginner level stuff like in the front of your mind because that's what you're using with your kids. But all that aside, we're going to go the hard way. We're going to go with life as we have it now. Work and kids and everything. We're going to start over another language. Does it matter? Do you think it matters? The strategy that we choose, do you think it matters based off of what language? Does the language that we choose to start over with, does it matter if it's close to English or far away from English or close to a language we've already worked with before versus far away? Do you think it matters?
Yes. I would say that that's probably one of the primary ways to show like how much effort you're going to have to put into a language and how feasible it is to gain fluency.
Right. But would it change the strategy with how you start though?
Yeah, I think so.
Really?
Maybe a little bit.
It would for me.
I would think that if we're, as native English speakers, if we start to learn German, it's not like the initial strategy will be different. It's just that we're already a few steps ahead in the fact that we already have a lot of vocabulary already in our vocabulary.
Yeah.
So same thing with any sort of Romance kind of language, Latin-based language. We already have so many cognates under our belt that that initial time frame, I just have to learn a bunch of words to know what's happening. We've kind of skipped that a little bit. On the other hand, I feel like doing that means that your initial strategy does get shifted because like for us in Chinese, we had that quiet period is what they call it, where we didn't really know any Chinese. And so we
just listened.
You had to listen. Like you had to know and you had to listen and you didn't really fully understand. It wasn't total comprehensible input, but we had this silent period of about 3 to 6 months where we didn't really say hardly anything.
We were just trying to hear the tones.
Right.
Like, just to get to where we could understand that there were differences in the sounds being made was tricky. And then we had to learn how to articulate those. That's
the reason why I say a slightly different initial strategy. Just because...
Slightly different focus, maybe.
Right.
But the steps would be fairly the same.
Yeah, it's like you skipped forward a few steps in the track. However, when you do that, the reason why I say slightly different is because I feel like those steps before, it's doing something else than just vocabulary building. So if we had to learn a new language now, one of the first steps that I would do is to try to just find those initial vocabulary words that I can start just like kind of playing with the sentences. So if we were learning German or if we were learning French, we would already have quite a few of those that we could kind of plug and chug. But skipping those steps would be the part that could also be detrimental in the fact that we still need to be able to hear what French words actually sound like, what German words actually sound like in a natural way.
So when I think of starting over, I think the first thing I would do is try to find a list of the 1,000 most common words and memorize them right off. Like, not like 20 words a day or anything, nothing crazy, because honestly, I'm not going to have a lot of time every day to dedicate to yet another language, in addition to work and kids and just life in general. But if I can set that goal in the distance, maybe in a year, maybe I could say that for at least a year. I have to set further goals so that like I'm doing really well if I go a lot faster. But if it's something I really want to do and I'm just as busy as I am now, I would say like 1,000 words that I really can hear when somebody says them. I can hear them in videos. I recognize them when I see them in a children's book or something. That first 1,000 words, that's where I want to be with them. I don't want to just memorize them. I want to be able to recognize them when I hear them. Because they are going to be my keywords to everything else I do in that language, in the beginner levels and in the low intermediate levels. So if I can get those 1,000 words first, that's going to be key. And that's going to involve a lot of that pronunciation too, because those first 1,000 words are where I start to get introduced to what does the language sound like? I need to have something to start like naming things as well. I would first write them on physical flashcards, like actually write them, because we know from language learning theory that the more that you physically write, it does more for you than a phone app. It does more for you than typing on a computer. But if you're physically writing them, it does way more for you. So I want to do that. I want to physically use them and see them on flashcards. Then I want to organize them into parts of speech. I don't know whether I'd have like a post-it note wall where I would organize them a bit, which sounds crazy, but this is how my mind works. If I can see the parts of speech and recognize, okay, because some languages have endings based on the part of speech, right? Or like English, you have a root word that can appear in multiple parts of speech. So if I can expand a little bit from that 1,000 words into their parts of speech and how frequently they're used, that would be pretty nifty. It'd be helpful for me to know that I can say, hit this, or close this. Is it open the light or turn on the light? I would start matching those parts of speech to the nouns. And if there's adjectives, I would start sticking adjectives wherever I can to start like making basic sentences essentially. Yeah. And then I would put labels with those basic sentences, like a verb and a noun together on all the things, like close the cabinet door, turn on the stove, open the fridge, like anything that I could do like that. The house would just look like labels. But if I could do that though, I would be reminding myself constantly, because that's one of the things for me with learning a language is I have to remind myself to step out of my English world to focus on that new language. But I don't know enough of that language to make it a complete lifestyle yet. And if I'm staying here in America with my family and everything we do is in English, then I really need to be focusing on trying to get that language into my daily life as much as possible, because eventually it's going to become a part of my lifestyle. But beginner level, that's what I would do. Is that kind of your same thing? It's how my mind works. We have different ways. Our minds work differently.
I would say yes to all of that, except for perhaps the parts of speech. That's not how my brain works, but I do recognize the value of it, because it's a puzzle. You have building blocks, you have Legos that you have to put together, and the more you can be able to categorize them, the more you can quickly use them and effectively use them. But for me, I don't know what it is. I learn better with collocations than I do with like a set grammar pattern. Yeah. So for me, I agree with the idea of like, open the door or turn on the light. I need to stick those two together. I don't just need to learn turn on, like that's a verb, or light, that's the noun. Like that would be hard for me. I like to smash them together in order to learn the phrase, turn on the light.
Larger blocks, and do that as soon as possible. Yeah. That's huge.
Inevitably, you're going to quickly progress into places where you're going to need even more vocabulary and even more vocabulary. Yeah. So the quicker I get that first 1,000 words down, for me, it kind of switches the game a little bit from I don't know what I'm looking at to here's a keyword, here's a keyword, here's a keyword, let me fill in the blanks in between. And then if I can do that quickly, then I can transition to my next step, which is using simple games, chores, things that I can do with the language. So no, I'm not going to have perfect German. No, I'm not going to have perfect Russian, but I will be able to kind of fill in the gaps and figure out what those gaps actually are when I interact with them.
So for me, in my next thing with all my labels around the house, I would learn some basic sentence patterns that are very commonly used for commands and that are commonly used for observation. Like, that is a cup. This is this. That is this. Put the cup on the counter. I would go there and I would write 1 or 2 sentences and add them to that label, so that every time that I'm doing something, I'm reminding myself to think in that language, and I'm reminding myself to speak in that language. And at first I'm going to probably sound like I'm like mumbling spells to myself or something. I'm going to be like whispering to myself in this new language all the time, and I'm going to be trying to associate and get my mouth to catch up with my mind, because I want to spend time thinking the statements out or the commands out in that language, in the target language, but I also want to get my mouth to catch up, because that's something that I noticed with the first language I did, is that I got to where I was so good at thinking in the language, my mouth just could not catch up. And I sounded so much less literate in the language I was going for because I was not able to keep my mouth up to where my mind was.
Which in reality, that's a very normal part of language development.
Especially for an introvert.
Listen before you speak, you can read before you can write, but if you don't quickly transition into that part, then your new language would just be a reading language. Yes. Your new language will just be a listening language, never a active speaking. Right. That's a very common problem. You guys have probably seen it yourself, where a person can listen to English, maybe watch English movies, no problem, or something like that. But if you actually ask them to produce that language, it's more difficult. And if you haven't initially developed the practice of, no, I'm going to actually make this a productive language, then it's really hard to kind of break that down the road. So start it early and then keep going in it.
From day one, I will choose a podcast or something with just a lot of language where it's just natives speaking that language. I won't be able to understand a thing that they're saying. It won't be comprehensible input. But what it will be is that language being spoken naturally in its way. And it would be getting my ears and my mind used to the cadence of that language. Its cadence, its rhythm, the tones being used, the way that people speak in that language. Even though I don't understand it, it would be something where I'm starting to get used to it. Just like I had to with Mandarin, just being surrounded by it, I had to get used to the way the people spoke. Even if it's not standard, it's not perfect, it's not what you find in the textbooks, I would not buy a textbook at all for the new language. I would not buy textbooks. I would not sign up for grammar classes. I wouldn't do anything like that. I would be focusing on listening and then learning words to make it more comprehensible to me.
Along with that, I think I would do some like more active games and things like that I can play hopefully with the kids or hopefully with each other. Just something that we can own a part of the language and make it more enjoyable. Because if it's always going to be learning and just acquiring just new stuff and never actually enjoying actually speaking it, then you can kill it from the beginning. If you're starting it and you just start it and it's drudgery, it's going to likely continue to be.
It'll be a memorized language. That's the thing that I want to avoid, is so much of the grammar translation method. They were memory focused. And that's something that was okay and great as long as we were actively doing it. But after, 5 years after actively studying those first languages, because we were so busy with the current language, it went away. And of course, we'll learn it faster than we would have initially, but it's gone. Like, the usable part of it is gone. That usable, I can live with this language, is gone. And so that's what I would want to avoid with another language, is I would want to start with, I'm not going to do grammar translation method. I'm not going to do rote memorization all the time. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be actively using it. I'm going to be engaging my family with it. So it's something that just becomes part of our family culture to be working in that target language.
The third step for me would be trying to find a tutor as soon as possible. After the 1,000 words, after I've already started doing some habits, so I'm actually producing language, I'm doing some maybe simple games like Simon Says or TPR or something, something where I'm actively using it. Very soon after that, I feel like the next stage would be starting working with a tutor.
Specifically a tutor that does not speak English or speaks English very poorly. It slows you down initially. Absolutely, it would slow me down initially, but we did this with Mandarin. Our first few tutors could not speak English, and that was so helpful because it made the tutor far more expressive. So if they were saying something that I just was not getting, they had to show me, and that was awesome. Like, there was a lot of mimicking going on. There's a lot more expressiveness on both sides. That was so interesting. It was such an interesting way to learn a language, and I actually prefer that. I would prefer to start with somebody who cannot communicate with me and tell me all the grammar rules and break it down and say, no, you did it wrong there because of this, 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 and this. No, I'd rather learn by them correcting me, by telling me the pattern that I should be doing and emphasizing it with their tone of voice and their body language. Because if they do that, I'm far more likely to actually use that myself.
I know that there's a lot of people that they disagree whether or not you should use your mother tongue while trying to learn your target language. For us, one of the things that we did in our classes is that we specifically chose to use not the country that we were in's language, so that the students there had to work extra hard to try to understand what we were saying, and we, as teachers, tried to work extra hard to help them understand.
Since they had never had it before, this was the most effective way to help them get out of the I'm studying for a test mentality and that's it. They needed to get to where I need to understand my teacher. I need to understand how to play this game. I need to understand how to do my homework. Shifting from a pass the test, get the grammar right, memorize words mentality to I need to use this language was a very important step. It was a crucial step toward getting them to just shift their strategy a bit.
Which is why I think finding a tutor pretty early in the process is a really good idea, because then it's a very clear reason. Like, I need to be able to speak enough language that I can talk to this person that I am paying money to, so that we can have that conversation, so that we can keep on building up. So it's not just a one-way conversation. It's not just a one-way street, but it's a two-way street. Mm-hmm. So I get the accountability of having a person there. I get the practice, regular conversation practice. I have the incentive of actually being able to communicate with another person. So I'm like actually talking to another person. And probably most importantly, because this is another person, because they're a teacher or a tutor, I can actually ask for specific feedback. So it's not just like, oh, where do I get, how do I get better? What do I need to do better? How do I need to practice? As a tutor, as a teacher in that native language, they can give you advice from that native language, in that native language, about how you should continue forward studying in that language.
And with that tutor, I would begin working with pronunciation very heavily. Before that, I would be more focused on just getting my ears accustomed to the language and the cadence and the pronunciation that they do. But obviously my mouth is not going to be articulating it properly until I get that feedback from somebody who knows, and somebody native who could say, you sound like a foreigner. I want to get past that point, because that was one of the things in the languages we've learned before. In some of those languages, we didn't get any pronunciation feedback because it was grammar translation. It was all about the writing and the reading. But then in the next language, you had a lot of people that would be saying things textbook style, but then the local people could not understand us. That part was very frustrating. So until we relaxed and stepped away from this is what the textbook says, this is what they say elsewhere, once we started to just listen and speak the way they did, then it's like, oh, now they can understand. Now we can order food, and we can do more than that. We can communicate. We can answer the phone and talk to somebody delivering to us. That was a huge step, and that was kind of a big breakthrough for us in that language. So I would want to work with a tutor from the dialect or the accent that I'm really focusing on, and I would want them to work with me on pronunciation. I don't want to start with a textbook. I don't want to start with recordings and things like that where I'm being told this is how you make the sounds. I don't want to do that. I want to work with a real person from the area that I want to be able to speak like, and have them tell me whether I sound clear enough to them or not.
Yeah, I think from this point forward, you start to basically refine more of your language, continuing to study vocabulary, you're continuing to get more advanced grammar patterns, you're continuing to practice. From books, from other native materials, you're acquiring this language. And at that point, you could even slide in a textbook every now and again to kind of upgrade some parts and just try to get a little bit better. But the point is that the beginning stages really set the course of the game. And I feel like if you start with a textbook way back in the beginning, where you're trying to learn words and you start way back there, then what happens is that you don't get that reinforcement. You learn a head language, you learn a memorized language, but you don't have the actual active reinforcement. So once you kind of get this pattern going, at that point, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time and a matter of practice. But you have to set these systems in place so that you can do that.
I would be going to the children's books that the people grew up with in that culture. And I would ask my tutor specifically, what do you remember from being a kid? What were the stories that your parents read you? What did they give you in elementary school for you to learn the history and the culture? And I would go from those and I would start working through those, because I would be introduced to a lot of terms, whether commonly used or not. They are terms that people understand from the way that they grew up. And so anytime that I know stories from when people were growing up, the more I'm going to understand the idioms that are being used around me, because a lot of idioms have their roots in children's stories and cultural tales that are passed down for generations. Like if I'm learning from there, I'm going to see new grammar patterns. I'm going to start seeing differences between written and spoken. I'm going to be expanding that vocabulary, and I'm going to be able to have conversations with my tutor. Like, is this a normal word? Can I say this in real life? Or do I have to just use it in writing? Or is it only part of older stories like this? Like, I can start having those conversations and start getting into the culture of that target language and start getting into the minds of how people grew up in my generation. That's something that is just so helpful for being able to understand. I would also be reading about the history of that culture. Some of that I would do in English, to be honest, so that I can start getting more and more and have more ties and connections. Because as I grow in that language, I need something to really attach the words and the things that people say and do today. I need something to attach it to. And the more connections I have to their history and their culture, the more efficiently I'm going to be able to do that, so that by the time I get to the intangible, difficult words or into the really rich idioms, I'm going to know where they came from. Or I'm going to have an idea of what to attach them to make them make sense so that I can use them properly. But for me, when I'm learning language, that's the most fun part. Like for me, I love history, I love the culture, and I love tying terms and words and idioms to that history and that culture. Because from there, you can understand people so much better. You can understand TV, you can understand humor, you can understand what's really going on. And even if my country teaches that same history differently than their country, it's still important to know the way they tell their stories. Because if I only learn the way that my country tells their country's stories, then I'm always going to be biased in some way. I'm going to be culturally irrelevant. So that's one of the things that's going to be important for me, is to understand that line of thinking so that I can better understand that culture and that language.
All right, guys, thank you so much for sticking with us on this video. We are language teachers, but we are also language learners, and we know how difficult it is. Yeah. So we encourage you guys. You can do this. Learning a new language is hard, and we understand that, but more importantly, keep going on that track. Once you've set it up, keep going, because a lot of times fatigue and morale is the thing that kills a war more than anything else. And so for you, in the same way, for your language journey, you got to figure out a way to continue to push through the fatigue and increase the morale. And for us, we have a video all about playing games that we did recently, and that is one way that I have found I can do that, is I can actually communicate. I can actually acquire that stuff, the information, the culture, the history, the background that Amber was just talking about. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check it out right up here.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.